The sound of hooves thundering through the midnight darkness told Samuel Ashford that something was terribly wrong before he even opened his eyes. And by the time his boots hit the floor of his ranch house, he knew with a sickening certainty that someone was stealing Thunder, the gray stallion his father had given him 3 weeks before dying in his arms. Samuel burst through the door of his modest home in nothing but his trousers and boots, his shirt forgotten in the urgency of the moment, and he could see 3 figures mounted on horses driving his prize stallion toward the open range beyond his property line. The moon hung full and bright over Laramie, Wyoming on this September night in 1882, and Samuel could make out enough detail to know these were not local men playing a prank, but hardened thieves who had targeted his ranch specifically. He ran toward the stable where his other horses were kept, knowing he would need to mount up immediately if he had any hope of catching them. But his hands fumbled with the gate latch in his panic, and precious seconds slipped away. Just as Samuel finally got the gate open and reached for his riding horse, a sound split the night that made his blood run cold. A woman's voice rang out in a language he did not understand, words sharp and commanding, followed immediately by a whistle that seemed to pierce the very air itself. Samuel spun around to see a figure on horseback racing across his northern pasture, moving with such fluid grace that horse and rider seemed to be one creature, and he watched in stunned amazement as this mysterious person cut directly across the path of the thieves with fearless precision. The thieves shouted in alarm and confusion, their formation breaking apart as they tried to evade this unexpected obstacle. Samuel grabbed his rifle from where it hung just inside the stable door and ran toward the confrontation, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. The woman, for he could now see clearly it was indeed a woman, had positioned herself between the thieves and Thunder, and she held something in her hand that glinted in the moonlight. One of the thieves raised his gun, and Samuel's finger moved to his trigger, but before anyone could fire, the woman threw whatever she held with devastating accuracy. The object struck the gunman's hand, and his weapon fell to the ground with a metallic clatter that carried across the quiet prairie. The thieves seemed to realize in that moment that their simple horse theft had become far more complicated than they had bargained for, and Samuel saw them exchange quick glances before 2 of them wheeled their horses around and galloped off into the darkness. The third man, the one who had dropped his gun, hesitated for just a moment too long. The woman guided her horse forward with nothing but the pressure of her knees, her hands free and ready, and she fixed the remaining thief with a stare that Samuel could feel even from 30 yards away. The man's nerve broke completely, and he kicked his horse into a desperate gallop, abandoning both his weapon and any claim to Thunder. Samuel reached Thunder's side and grabbed the lead rope that still dangled from the stallion's halter, his hands shaking with adrenaline and relief as he ran his palm down the horse's neck to check for injuries. Thunder tossed his head and snorted but seemed otherwise unharmed, and Samuel turned his attention to the woman who had saved his most precious possession. She sat astride a paint mare with the easy confidence of someone who had been born in the saddle, and as she guided her horse closer, Samuel could see that she was Apache, her long dark hair braided down her back and her clothing a mixture of traditional and practical pieces that marked her as someone who moved between 2 worlds. "Thank you," Samuel said, his voice rough with emotion and breathlessness. "I do not know how you happened to be here at exactly the right moment, but you saved this horse and possibly saved my life. Those men would not have let me catch them without a fight." The woman regarded him with dark eyes that seemed to catalog everything about him in an instant, and when she finally spoke, her English was careful but clear. "I was camped in the hills north of your land. I heard them talking as they rode past my fire. They did not see me in the shadows, but I heard them say they would take the gray stallion from the Ashford ranch because he was worth more than 10 ordinary horses. She paused, her eyes moving to Thunder with obvious appreciation. They were right about his value. This is a fine animal. Samuel felt heat rise to his face, though whether from embarrassment at being caught unprepared or from something about the way this woman looked at him with such direct honesty, he could not say. My name is Samuel Ashford, and I own this ranch, though I have only been the owner for 3 weeks since my father passed. This stallion was his final gift to me, and losing him would have meant losing the last piece of my father I had left. He extended his hand toward her in the formal greeting of his people, aware that it might seem strange given the circumstances, but not knowing what else to do. The woman looked at his outstretched hand for a moment, and something that might have been amusement flickered across her face before she reached down from her horse to clasp his hand briefly. Her grip was strong and her palm was calloused from years of hard work, and Samuel felt something pass between them in that moment of contact that he could not name but could not deny. My name is Mila Johona. I am Apache, and I have been traveling alone since the reservation in Arizona became too small for my spirit. I mean no trouble to you or your land. I only camped for the night and planned to move on in the morning. You saved my horse and probably my life, Samuel said firmly, releasing her hand but not stepping back. You are welcome to camp on my land for as long as you need, and if there is anything I can offer you by way of thanks, you need only ask. Food, supplies, anything at all. He meant every word, though he was aware that his neighbors would have strong opinions about him offering hospitality to an Apache woman traveling alone. The tensions between the white settlers and the indigenous peoples in Wyoming territory were less violent than they had been a decade earlier, but suspicion and prejudice ran deep on both sides. Mila Johona studied him again with those penetrating eyes, and Samuel had the distinct feeling she was measuring not just his words but his intentions. I need nothing, she finally said, but I will accept the offer to camp on your land tonight without fear of being driven off. That is thanks enough. She began to turn her horse away, clearly intending to return to wherever she had made her camp, but Samuel found himself speaking before he had fully thought through what he wanted to say. Wait, he called out, and she pulled her horse up short, looking back at him with one eyebrow slightly raised. Would you at least let me offer you breakfast in the morning? It is the least I can do, and I would like to hear more about how you learned to ride like that and throw with such accuracy. I have never seen anything like it. For the first time, Mila's expression softened into something that might have been the beginning of a smile. You want to learn Apache skills? She asked, and there was definitely amusement in her voice now. Most white ranchers would rather pretend we do not exist at all, except when they want our land or want to push us further away. Samuel felt the truth of her words like a physical blow, but he forced himself to hold her gaze. I cannot speak for other ranchers, and I know my people have done terrible things to yours. But I was raised by a father who taught me to judge people by their actions, not by their blood. Your actions tonight were those of someone brave and skilled and honorable. I would be a fool not to acknowledge that, and I would be a greater fool not to want to learn from someone with such abilities. Something changed in Mila's expression, a subtle shift that Samuel could not fully read, but that felt significant. I will come to your house when the sun rises, she said quietly. But I will not come inside. We will eat outside where anyone passing by can see that everything is proper and there is no deception. I will not bring trouble to you because of foolish rumors. I am not worried about rumors, Samuel started to say, but Mila cut him off with a sharp gesture. You should be worried, she said, and now her voice was hard again. I have seen what happens when white men are accused of being too friendly with Apache women. I have seen what happens to Apache women who are seen as too friendly with white men. We will be careful, or we will not do this at all." Samuel nodded slowly, recognizing the wisdom in her caution even as he felt frustrated by the necessity of it. Outside then, when the sun rises, and Mila. He waited until she looked directly at him again. "Thank you, truly. You did something incredibly brave tonight, and I will not forget it." This time Mila did smile, just a small curve of her lips that transformed her face from merely striking to genuinely beautiful. "Sleep well, Samuel Ashford. Your horse is safe now, and I will make sure no one approaches your ranch before morning. I am a light sleeper, and I have no other obligations tonight." With that, she touched her heels to her mare's sides and rode off into the darkness, moving back toward the northern hills as silently as she had appeared. Samuel stood in his pasture for several long minutes after she disappeared, one hand still resting on Thunder's neck, his mind racing with everything that had just happened. He had lived in Laramie his entire life, all 24 years of it, and he had seen Apache people before when they came to trade or when they passed through on their way to somewhere else. But he had never actually spoken with one at length, and he had certainly never had one save something precious to him. His father had taught him to be respectful of all people, but the elder Ashford had also been a product of his time and place, carrying prejudices he had never fully examined. Samuel led Thunder back to the stable and made sure the stallion was securely inside before checking on his other horses. He found that the thieves had cut the lock on his stable door, and he spent the next hour rigging a temporary repair that would hold until morning, when he could get a new lock from the general store in town. As he worked, his mind kept returning to Mila Johona, to the fearless way she had confronted 3 armed men, to the careful way she had spoken about protecting both their reputations, to the smile that had briefly lit her face. When Samuel finally returned to his house and his bed, dawn was already beginning to lighten the eastern sky, and he found sleep impossible. He kept thinking about Mila camped somewhere in his northern hills, watching over his ranch like a self-appointed guardian. The thought made him feel safe in a way he had not felt since his father had died, leaving him alone to manage 300 acres and 40 head of cattle. Samuel had been managing well enough, but the loneliness had been crushing at times, and he had not realized how much he had been carrying that weight until someone else had stepped in to share the burden, even briefly. Samuel rose before the sun had fully cleared the horizon and set about making breakfast. He was not an excellent cook, but his father had insisted he learn the basics, saying no man should be helpless when it came to feeding himself. Samuel made coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in, fried eggs and bacon, and mixed up a batch of biscuits that he baked in his cast-iron Dutch oven. He carried everything outside to the wooden table his father had built years ago, a sturdy piece of furniture that sat in the yard between the house and the barn where it caught the morning sun. Mila appeared as silently as she had the night before, riding down from the northern hills just as Samuel was setting out plates. In the morning light, Samuel could see her more clearly, and he was struck again by how she carried herself with such natural grace and confidence. She looked to be close to his own age, perhaps 22 or 23, and she wore a buckskin shirt decorated with intricate beadwork over dark woolen trousers that had clearly been traded from white settlers. Her long black hair was still braided, but now he could see small shells and beads woven into the braid. "Good morning," Samuel called out, raising one hand in greeting. "I hope you are hungry. I may have made too much food, but I was not sure what you might like." Mila dismounted with fluid ease and tied her mare to the hitching post near the table. "I am hungry," she admitted, moving closer but keeping the table between them. Samuel noticed. "I have not had eggs in many months." On the reservation, we had few chickens, and they were needed for more than just one person's breakfast. Samuel gestured to the chair across from him, and they both sat down at the same time. He poured coffee for both of them and began dividing the food between their plates, making sure to give Mila generous portions. They ate in silence for the first few minutes, and Samuel found himself sneaking glances at her between bites, fascinated by everything about her. She ate with neat efficiency, wasting nothing, and he saw her carefully save half of her biscuit, wrapping it in a piece of cloth she produced from her pocket. "You do not have to save food," Samuel said gently. "There is plenty more where that came from, and I meant what I said about you being welcome to anything I can offer." Mila looked at him steadily. "I have learned not to waste anything and not to assume tomorrow will provide as today has provided. It is a hard habit to break." Samuel felt ashamed of his own assumptions and his comfortable life. "I am sorry. That was thoughtless of me. Of course you should save whatever you want." "You are not responsible for my circumstances," Mila said, but her voice was softer now. "And you are being kind, which is not something I expected when I decided to stop those thieves last night. I thought you might thank me briefly and send me on my way. I did not think you would offer hospitality." "Why did you stop them then?" Samuel asked, genuinely curious. "If you did not expect anything in return, why did you put yourself in danger for a stranger's horse?" Mila was quiet for a moment, her fingers wrapped around her coffee cup as she stared into the dark liquid. "Because it was wrong," she finally said. "Because those men were thieves and cowards, riding in the darkness to steal what they had not earned. Because I know what it is to have something precious taken by force, and I will not stand by and watch it happen to another if I have the power to prevent it." She looked up at him then, and Samuel saw pain in her eyes that went soul deep. "And because that stallion is a beautiful animal who deserves better than to be stolen and probably run to death, or sold to someone who would not appreciate his worth." Samuel set down his fork, his appetite suddenly gone as he absorbed the weight of what she had said. "What was taken from you?" he asked quietly, then immediately regretted the question when he saw her face close down. "I am sorry. That was too personal. You do not have to answer." "My family," Mila said flatly. "My mother, my father, my younger brother. They were killed 8 years ago by men who decided that Apache people should not be allowed to hunt on land they had hunted on for generations. I was 14 years old, and I only survived because my father saw them coming and told me to hide in a crevice in the rocks. I watched from that hiding place while those men murdered everyone I loved." Samuel felt like someone had reached into his chest and squeezed his heart. "Mila, I am so sorry. No one should have to experience that, especially not a child." "I stopped being a child that day," Mila said, and her voice was distant now, as if she was speaking from somewhere far away. "An uncle took me in and raised me on the reservation, and he taught me to fight and to ride and to survive. He said I needed to be strong enough that no one could ever hurt me again the way those men had hurt my family. When he died 2 years ago, I had no reason to stay on the reservation. I wanted to see what else was out there, to find a place where I could breathe without feeling like the walls were closing in around me." "Have you found such a place?" Samuel asked, though he thought he already knew the answer. Mila shook her head. "Not yet, but I keep looking." They finished their breakfast in a silence that felt both heavy and strangely comfortable, and Samuel found himself wanting desperately to say something that would ease the pain he had seen in Mila's eyes. But he had no words that felt adequate to the task, so instead he simply cleared the plates and brought out more coffee. They sat together at the table as the sun climbed higher in the sky, and gradually Mila began to talk about other things, lighter things. She told him about the places she had traveled in the past 2 years, about the pueblos in New Mexico and the high mountains of Colorado. She told him about learning to track from her uncle, and about the time she had followed a mountain lion for 3 days just to see where it denned. Samuel found himself talking too, sharing stories about his father and about learning to run the ranch, about his struggles to keep everything going after the old man had died so suddenly of a heart failure. He told her about Thunder, and how his father had won the stallion in a card game with a cavalry officer who had been too drunk to know what he was wagering. He told her about his dreams of breeding horses that would be known throughout the territory for their speed and endurance. "You should breed Thunder to strong mares with good lines," Mila said, her professional interest clear in her voice. "But you should be careful about his temperament. He is spirited, and that is good, but some stallions pass on mean natures to their foals. You need to make sure he is patient as well as powerful." "How do you know so much about horses?" Samuel asked, impressed by her knowledge. "My people have been breeding horses for longer than yours have been on this continent," Mila said, and there was pride in her voice now. "We learned from the Spanish, and before that, horses were sacred to us because they gave us freedom and power. I grew up knowing horses as well as I know my own body. They are not just tools to us, they are partners." Samuel nodded slowly, understanding that he was receiving an education that few white ranchers would ever have access to. "Would you be willing to look at Thunder more closely, to tell me what you think of his conformation and his potential as a breeding stallion? I would value your opinion more than anyone else's I can think of." Mila looked surprised, and then something like pleasure crossed her face. "Yes, I would be willing to do that. Let me see this horse that is worth so much to you." They walked together to the stable, and Samuel brought Thunder out into the corral where the morning light could illuminate every detail of the stallion's build. Mila walked slowly around the horse, her eyes taking in everything, and occasionally she would reach out to run her hand along Thunder's legs or back, her touch firm but gentle. Thunder, who could be fractious with strangers, stood perfectly still for her examination, his ears forward with interest rather than alarm. "He is magnificent," Mila finally pronounced. "His chest is deep and his legs are straight and strong. He has the build of a horse that can run for miles without tiring, and his eye is intelligent and calm despite his spirit. If you breed him carefully, you could build a line of horses that would indeed be famous." "But Samuel," she turned to look at him directly, "you will need good mares, and good mares cost money. How will you afford them?" Samuel rubbed the back of his neck, embarrassed. "I have been saving everything I can from selling cattle. I thought perhaps by next year I would have enough to buy 2 or 3 quality mares. It is slow going, but I do not see another way." Mila was quiet for a moment, clearly thinking. "There is another way," she finally said. "Among my people, when someone wants to improve their herd, they sometimes arrange to borrow mares from others who have good bloodlines. The owner of the mare gets the first pick of the foal crop, and the person who provides the stallion keeps the rest. It is a way to build quality without spending all your money at once." Samuel stared at her, his mind racing with the possibilities. "That is brilliant, but who would be willing to make such an arrangement with me? I am new to being a ranch owner, and I do not have the reputation to convince people to trust me with their valuable horses." "You have me," Mila said quietly. "I have no ranch and no herd, but I know horses and I know people who own horses. There are Apache families trying to rebuild their herds after being forced onto reservations. There are Mexican ranchers who might be willing to make arrangements if someone they trust vouches for you. I could be that person, if you would want me to. Samuel felt his heart begin to race. You would do that for me? Why, we have only known each other for a few hours. Mila met his eyes, and Samuel saw something in her gaze that he could not quite interpret. Because you treated me like a person, not like a problem or a threat. Because you listened when I spoke and valued what I had to say. Because I see in you someone who wants to build something good and lasting, and I have spent 2 years wandering without purpose. Perhaps helping you would give me something to work toward, at least for a while. How long is a while? Samuel asked, and he was surprised by how much the answer mattered to him. I do not know, Mila said honestly. I have never stayed in one place for more than a few weeks since I left the reservation. But if you would be willing to let me camp on your land and work with your horses, I could stay longer than I have stayed anywhere else. We could see if this arrangement works for both of us. Samuel knew he should think about this carefully, knew he should consider what his neighbors would say, and how it might affect his reputation in town. But none of that seemed to matter as much as the opportunity standing before him, the chance to learn from someone with knowledge he desperately needed, and the chance to spend more time with a woman who fascinated him in ways he was only beginning to understand. Yes, he said firmly. Yes, I would like that very much. You can camp wherever you like on my land, or I could clear out the small barn and make it into proper living quarters for you. It would be more comfortable than a tent, especially as we move into winter. Mila looked startled. You would do that? Give me a building of my own. It is not being used for anything except storage right now, and most of what is in there is junk left over from my grandfather's time. I could clear it out in a few days and build a proper stove for heat. It would not be fancy, but it would be warm and dry. For a long moment, Mila just looked at him, and Samuel could see she was struggling with whether to accept. If I stay, she finally said, people will talk. They will say things about you and about me, and some of those things will be ugly. You need to understand that before you make this offer real. Let them talk, Samuel said, surprising himself with his vehemence. I have lived my whole life trying to be what my father wanted and what this town expected. For once, I want to do something because it feels right, not because it will make other people comfortable. Having you here feels right. Teaching me about horses and helping me build something worthwhile feels right. So unless you have reservations, I am asking you to stay. Mila took a deep breath, and when she let it out, Samuel saw some of the tension leave her shoulders. Then I will stay, she said. At least for now, I will stay. But Samuel, we need to have rules. I will not be seen going in and out of your house when you are alone there. We will work together in the daylight where anyone can see us, and I will keep my distance otherwise. I will not have people saying I am trying to trap you into something or that you are taking advantage of me. Do you agree to this? I agree, Samuel said, though part of him wanted to protest that he did not care what people thought. But he understood her need for protection, understood that she had to be more careful than he did because she had so much more to lose. We will be proper and careful, and we will let our work speak for itself. They shook hands on it, that same firm grip that had passed between them the night before, and Samuel felt again that nameless something that seemed to flow between their joined palms. When Mila pulled her hand away, he found himself wanting to reach for her again, but he forced himself to step back and give her space. I should get started clearing out that barn, he said, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. If you want to ride into the hills and bring back your camp, you can settle in while I work. Mila nodded and went to retrieve her mare, and Samuel watched her ride away with a mixture of anticipation and disbelief at what he had just committed to. He was going to have an Apache woman living on his property and working with his horses, and the good people of Laramie were going to have opinions about it that would range from disapproving to hostile. But as Samuel turned toward the small barn and began hauling out broken equipment and rotted leather, and all the accumulated debris of 3 generations, he found he did not care nearly as much as he probably should have. The work was hard and hot, and Samuel lost himself in the rhythm of it, grateful for the physical exertion that kept his mind from spinning out into worry and doubt. He had cleared about half the barn when Mila returned with her bedroll and saddlebags, and the few possessions she had been traveling with. She helped him finish clearing the space, and Samuel was struck by how she worked without complaint or hesitation, hauling out heavy items and sweeping out years of accumulated dust with the same focused efficiency she had shown in everything else she did. By late afternoon, the barn was empty and clean, and Samuel went into his house to bring out a cot, some blankets, a small table, and a chair. It was not much, but it was better than sleeping on the ground, and when he saw Mila run her hand over the sturdy wooden cot frame, he knew she appreciated the gesture. "I will start building a stove tomorrow," Samuel said. "It should not take more than a few days to put together something that will keep you warm when the weather turns cold." "You do not have to do all of this," Mila said quietly. "I am used to much less." "I know I do not have to," Samuel replied. "I want to. You saved Thunder, and you are going to help me build something I could not build alone. This is not charity. This is partnership." Mila looked at him for a long moment, and then she nodded. "Partnership," she repeated, as if testing the word. "All right. Then as partners, what should we do next?" "Next," Samuel said, grinning, "you should teach me how to throw like you did last night. I have been wondering all day what you threw that knocked the gun out of that thief's hand." Mila smiled, and it transformed her face again in that way that made Samuel's breath catch. "I will teach you," she said, "but first, you must understand that it takes years to learn to throw with true accuracy. One afternoon will not make you an expert." "I understand," Samuel said, "but I would still like to learn." So Mila taught him the basics of throwing, using smooth river stones as practice weapons. She showed him how to stand, how to judge distance, how to release at precisely the right moment so the stone would fly true. Samuel was terrible at first, his throws going wide or falling short, but Mila was a patient teacher, correcting his form with gentle touches to his shoulder or arm that sent sparks racing through his body. By the time the sun began to set, Samuel had managed to hit a tree trunk 3 times out of 20 attempts, and Mila pronounced him a decent beginning student. They ate dinner together at the outdoor table again, and this time Samuel noticed that Mila did not save any of her food, a small gesture of trust that felt enormous. They talked about their plans for the ranch and for Thunder's breeding program, and Samuel found himself telling Mila things he had never shared with anyone, dreams and fears and hopes that he had kept locked away inside himself. As darkness fell and the stars began to emerge in the vast Wyoming sky, Samuel reluctantly stood to clear the dishes. "I should let you get some rest," he said. "We have a lot of work ahead of us tomorrow." "Samuel," Mila said, and something in her voice made him turn back to look at her. "Thank you for all of this, for seeing me as a person and not just as an Apache, for trusting me with your dreams. It means more than you know." "Thank you," Samuel said softly, "for saving Thunder, for agreeing to stay, for giving me something to look forward to for the first time since my father died." He wanted to say more, wanted to tell her that she made him feel alive in a way he had not felt in months, but it was too soon and too much, so he simply nodded good night and walked back to his house. That night, Samuel lay in his bed and stared at the ceiling, thinking about the woman sleeping in the barn 40 yards away. He knew he was playing with fire, knew that letting himself care about Mila could lead to nothing but heartache and trouble. But he could not seem to stop himself from wanting to be near her, from wanting to learn everything about her, from wanting to make her smile the way she had smiled when he had asked her to teach him to throw. The next few weeks fell into a pattern that felt natural and right, despite the strangeness of their situation. Samuel and Mila worked together from dawn to dusk, tending to the horses and cattle, making repairs around the ranch, and building the stove for her barn room. True to her word, Mila was careful about maintaining proper distance, never entering his house and always making sure their work together was visible to anyone who might pass by. But within those boundaries, they grew closer in ways that had nothing to do with physical proximity. Samuel learned that Mila had a sharp sense of humor and a laugh that sounded like music. He learned that she was an excellent tracker and could read signs in the land that he had never even noticed. He learned that she missed her family every single day, but that she refused to let grief consume her life. Mila learned that Samuel was gentler than most men she had known, that he genuinely cared about doing right by his animals and his land, and that he had a stubborn streak a mile wide when it came to things he believed in. They also began working on building connections with other ranchers who might be interested in arranging breeding contracts for their mares. Mila wrote letters to Apache families she knew from the reservation, and Samuel was surprised to learn that she could read and write English as well as he could. She explained that missionaries had run a school on the reservation, and while she had hated much of what they had tried to teach her about abandoning her culture, she had valued the practical skills of reading and writing. One afternoon in early October, Samuel came back from town with news that made his stomach twist with anxiety. "There has been talk," he said without preamble as Mila looked up from the saddle she was mending. "Some of the men in town have been saying things about you being here, about us working together. Most of it is just ugly gossip, but Jack Morrison told me I should be careful, that some people are not happy about an Apache living on a white man's ranch." Mila set down the saddle, her face carefully neutral. "Do you want me to leave?" "No," Samuel said immediately and emphatically. "Absolutely not. I just wanted you to know so we could be prepared. I will not let anyone drive you off, Mila. You have as much right to be here as anyone." "I have no rights, Samuel," Mila said quietly. "Not in the eyes of your law and not in the eyes of most of your people. I am here because you are allowing it, and that permission could be revoked at any time if enough pressure is brought to bear." "It will not be revoked," Samuel said, and he was surprised by the fierceness in his own voice. "I will not let them do this. You are not just some hired hand I can dismiss. You are my partner, and more than that, you are my friend. I am not going to abandon you just because small-minded people cannot see past their own prejudices." Mila looked at him for a long moment, and Samuel saw something shift in her expression, something that looked like hope mixed with fear. "You are a good man, Samuel Ashford," she said softly. "But good men can still be destroyed by their communities if they stand too far outside what is acceptable. I do not want to be the reason you lose everything you have worked for." "You are not the reason," Samuel said, stepping closer. "The reason would be the people who cannot accept that someone different from them might have value and worth. Do not take responsibility for their hatred, Mila. That belongs to them alone." They stood there in the barn, surrounded by the smell of hay and leather and horses, and Samuel felt the air between them grow charged with something he could no longer pretend to ignore. He cared about Mila, cared about her in ways that went far beyond friendship or business partnership. He wanted to protect her and make her laugh and see her smile every day for the rest of his life. But he knew that saying any of that out loud would change everything between them, and he was not sure he had the right to ask her to take that risk. Mila seemed to sense something of what he was feeling because she looked away first, breaking the moment. "We should get back to work," she said, her voice slightly unsteady. "These saddles will not mend themselves." Samuel nodded and forced himself to move away, to pick up the tools he had set down and return to his own tasks. But for the rest of that day and into the evening, he could not shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted between them, that they had crossed some invisible line that could not be uncrossed. That night, Samuel was awakened by the sound of horses and men's voices, and his first thought was that the thieves had returned. He grabbed his rifle and ran outside in his nightshirt, but what he found was not thieves but something almost worse. 5 men from town sat on horseback in his yard, and by the light of the torches 2 of them carried, Samuel could see that their faces were hard and angry. "Samuel Ashford," called out Carl Peterson, who owned the feed store in town. "We need to talk to you about the Apache woman you have living here." Samuel's grip tightened on his rifle, though he kept it pointed at the ground. "Her name is Mila, and she is my employee and my guest. What business is it of yours?" "It is our business when you bring savages onto decent land," snarled Henry Thompson, a rancher whose property bordered Samuel's to the west. "You are making all of us look bad, treating that Indian like she is a real person instead of the thieving trash her kind has always been." Samuel felt rage rise up in him so fierce he had to force himself to breathe before responding. "Get off my land," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Get off my land right now, or I will make you leave." "You are going to threaten us?" Carl Peterson asked, incredulous. "There are 5 of us and 1 of you, boy. You might want to think about who you are crossing here." "I think he should think about the fact that he is not alone." Everyone turned to see Mila standing in the doorway of her barn, and she held a rifle of her own, one Samuel had not even known she possessed. She was dressed in her buckskin shirt and trousers, her hair loose around her shoulders, and in the torchlight she looked fierce and beautiful and utterly unafraid. "You should leave now," Mila said calmly, as if she was discussing the weather rather than facing down 5 angry men. "You are trespassing on private land and you are making threats. In the eyes of the law, Samuel would be justified in defending his property, and I would be justified in helping him do so." "You do not scare us, squaw," Henry Thompson spat. "Your kind has been making noise for years, but you have no power anymore. The cavalry made sure of that." "The cavalry is not here right now," Mila pointed out, her rifle never wavering. "But Samuel and I are here, and we are both armed, and we are both willing to defend this ranch." "Are you willing to die to make a point about who should be allowed to work here?" There was a long, tense silence, and Samuel could see the men looking at each other, clearly uncertain about how to proceed. They had expected to intimidate him, to make him send Mila away through the force of their collective pressure. They had not expected resistance, and they certainly had not expected Mila to face them down with such calm courage. Finally, Carl Peterson spat on the ground and jerked his horse's head around. "This is not over, Ashford. You are making enemies you cannot afford to have, and that Indian is going to bring you nothing but trouble. Mark my words." The 5 men rode off into the darkness, and Samuel and Mila stood in the yard until the sound of hoofbeats had faded completely. Then Samuel turned to Mila, his hands shaking from adrenaline and anger, and said the first thing that came into his head. "Where did you get that rifle?" Mila lowered her weapon, and Samuel saw that her hands were shaking too. "I have always had it. I just kept it hidden because I did not want to make you nervous. A lone Apache woman traveling with a rifle tends to make white people assume the worst." "You could have told me," Samuel said, moving closer. "I would not have thought the worst. I trust you, Mila." "I know," Mila said quietly. "I know that now. but old habits are hard to break, Samuel. I have spent years learning to hide anything that might make me seem threatening or dangerous, and revealing the rifle felt like revealing too much. Samuel reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took the rifle from her hands. He set it down carefully against the barn wall, and then, before he could talk himself out of it, he pulled Mila into his arms. She stiffened for just a moment, and then she relaxed against him, her face pressing into his shoulder, and Samuel felt her begin to shake with the tears she had been holding back. "You were so brave," Samuel murmured into her hair. "You were so incredibly brave, and I am so sorry you had to face that. Those men had no right to come here and say those things to you." "They had every right according to the way things are," Mila said, her voice muffled against his nightshirt. "They are white men and I am Apache. In this world, that gives them power over me, no matter what you or I might think about fairness." "Then the world is wrong," Samuel said fiercely. "And I will not stand by and let it crush you just because you had the bad fortune to be born into the wrong skin according to small-minded fools." He pulled back slightly so he could look at her face, and what he saw there made his breath catch. Tears streaked her cheeks, but her eyes were blazing with emotion, and before he could think about whether it was wise or foolish, Samuel bent his head and kissed her. For one frozen moment, Mila went completely still, and Samuel thought he had made a terrible mistake. But then she kissed him back with a fierceness that matched his own, her hands coming up to grip his shoulders as if she needed to anchor herself to something solid. The kiss was not gentle or tentative. It was the kiss of two people who had been holding back for too long, who had been circling around their feelings without daring to acknowledge them. And now that the dam had broken, neither of them wanted to stop. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Samuel rested his forehead against Mila's and tried to find words adequate to what he was feeling. "I am sorry," he started to say, but Mila cut him off. "Do not apologize," she said firmly. "Do not you dare apologize for that. I wanted it as much as you did. I have wanted it for weeks, but I was afraid to let myself feel anything because I knew how complicated it would make everything." "It is already complicated," Samuel pointed out, his hand still resting on her waist, unwilling to let her go. "We might as well be honest about what we want." "And what do you want, Samuel?" Mila asked, searching his face as if she could read the answer there. "You," Samuel said simply. "I want you, Mila. I want to wake up every morning knowing you are here. I want to work beside you and eat meals with you and learn everything there is to know about you. I want to protect you from men like those who were just here, and I want to build something together that neither of us could build alone. I am falling in love with you, and I think I have been since the moment you rode out of the darkness to save my horse." Mila closed her eyes, and Samuel saw fresh tears slip down her cheeks. "You do not know what you are saying. If people find out that you have feelings for me, that we have become more than just working partners, they will destroy you. They will run you out of Laramie, and they will make sure you cannot sell your cattle or your horses anywhere in the territory. And they will do worse to me. Do you understand that? Do you understand what you would be giving up?" "I understand," Samuel said, and he was surprised by how calm his voice sounded. "I understand, and I am telling you that I do not care. I would rather lose everything and have you than keep everything and lose you. You make me feel alive, Mila. You make me want to be better and braver and more honest than I have ever been. I know it is fast, and I know it is complicated, and I know the world will fight against us. But I also know that I have never felt this way about anyone, and I will not turn away from it just because it is difficult." Mila opened her eyes and looked at him, and Samuel saw his own feelings reflected back at him in her gaze. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered. I have been fighting it because I knew how much danger it would put us both in, but I cannot fight it anymore. You are kind and good, and you see me as a person, not as a problem. You listen when I speak, and you value what I know, and you make me laugh. I have not laughed the way I laugh with you since before my family died. You have given me hope again, Samuel, and I did not think anyone could do that. They kissed again, gentler this time but no less intense, and when they finally pulled apart, Samuel took Mila's hand and laced his fingers through hers. "We will figure this out," he said. "I do not know how yet, but we will find a way to be together that does not require us to hide or pretend. You deserve to be loved openly and proudly, Mila, and I intend to give you that." "We have to be careful," Mila said, squeezing his hand. "At least for now, we cannot let people in town know about this. They are already suspicious and hostile, and if they find out we have feelings for each other, it will give them an excuse to do worse than just make threats." Samuel knew she was right, even as he hated the necessity of it. "All right," he agreed. "We will be careful in town and around anyone who visits. But here, on this ranch, we do not have to hide. Here, we can be honest about what we feel." They stood together in the dark yard, holding hands and making plans, and Samuel felt something settle into place inside him that had been out of alignment since his father had died. He had a purpose again, something beyond just surviving day to day. He had Mila, and he had a future worth fighting for. The weeks that followed were some of the happiest of Samuel's life, despite the undercurrent of tension that came from knowing they were living on borrowed time. He and Mila continued to work together during the day, but now their partnership was deepened by the love they shared. They were careful to maintain proper appearances whenever they went to town or when neighbors stopped by, but in the privacy of the ranch, they allowed themselves to be a couple. They held hands as they walked through the pastures. They kissed in the barn when the work was done. They talked late into the night about their hopes and fears and dreams. Mila began receiving responses to the letters she had sent, and to Samuel's delight, several Apache families expressed interest in arranging breeding contracts for their mares. One family in particular, the Johanas, who Mila said were distant relatives of hers, had 3 mares they thought would be perfect matches for Thunder. They proposed that they would bring the mares to Samuel's ranch in the spring, that Thunder would cover them, and that the Johanas would take the first foal from each mare while Samuel would keep the second and third foals. "This is perfect," Samuel said excitedly as he read the letter for the 3rd time. 3 quality mares with good bloodlines, and within a few years we will have our own breeding stock to build on. Mila, this is going to work. We are actually going to make this happen." Mila smiled, but Samuel could see worry in her eyes. "It will work if we can keep everything stable until spring. But Samuel, those men who came here last month have not forgotten about us. I see them in town sometimes, watching us. I am afraid they are planning something." "Let them plan," Samuel said, pulling her close. "We have not done anything wrong. We are running an honest business and building something good. They cannot touch us just because they do not approve of who I choose to work with." But Mila's worry proved justified. In mid-November, Samuel received a visit from Sheriff Tom Crawford, a weathered man in his 50s who had been keeping the peace in Laramie for nearly 20 years. The sheriff sat at Samuel's outdoor table, hat in hand, and looked distinctly uncomfortable. "Samuel, I need to talk to you about the Apache woman living here," Sheriff Crawford said without preamble. "I have been getting complaints from some of the folks in town, and I need to make sure everything is on the up and up." "Everything is completely proper," Samuel said, keeping his voice level with effort. "Mila works for me. She helps with the horses and with general ranch work. She lives in her own building, and we maintain appropriate boundaries at all times. What exactly are people complaining about? Sheriff Crawford sighed and turned his hat in his hands. They are saying she is dangerous, that she might be a scout for Apache raiders, that you are being foolish to trust her. Now, I do not necessarily believe all that nonsense, but I have to investigate when I get complaints. Can you vouch for her character and her intentions? Absolutely, Samuel said firmly. Mila saved my prize stallion from thieves. She has been nothing but honest and hardworking since she has been here. She has connections with Apache families who want to do business with me, and she is helping me build a breeding program that would not be possible without her knowledge and skills. Anyone who says otherwise is lying, because they are prejudiced against Apache people in general. The sheriff looked at him for a long moment. You are putting yourself in a difficult position, son. Your father was well respected in this town, and people are willing to give you some slack because of that. But if you keep pushing this thing with the Apache woman, you are going to lose that goodwill. Is she really worth all the trouble she is causing? Samuel felt anger burn hot in his chest, but he forced himself to speak calmly. Her name is Mila, and yes, she is worth it. She is worth standing up for what is right instead of bowing to what is comfortable. My father taught me to judge people by their character, and Mila has more character than most of the people complaining about her. Sheriff Crawford stood up and settled his hat back on his head. I cannot protect you if this situation gets out of hand, Samuel. You need to understand that. If people decide to take action against you or against her, I might not be able to stop them, especially if they think they are in the right. I am just one man, and there are limits to what I can do. I understand, Samuel said, though his stomach was churning. But I am not going to send Mila away just because some people cannot see past their own ignorance. She stays, Sheriff. That is final. The sheriff nodded slowly. Then I hope you are prepared for the consequences. I really do. He walked to his horse and rode away, leaving Samuel standing in his yard with the sick feeling that things were about to get much worse. Mila had been watching from inside her barn, and she came out as soon as the sheriff was gone. What did he say? She asked, though Samuel could tell from her expression that she had guessed most of it. He says people are complaining and that he cannot protect us if things escalate, Samuel said flatly. He thinks I should send you away. Maybe you should, Mila said quietly. Samuel, I do not want to be the reason you get hurt or lose everything you have worked for. Stop saying that, Samuel said, more sharply than he intended. He took a breath and softened his tone. Mila, you are not the reason. The reason is people who would rather cling to hatred than try to understand someone different from them. I am not sending you away. I am not going to let them win. And if they come back with more than threats, Mila asked, what then? Are you prepared to fight your own neighbors? Are you prepared to possibly kill someone to defend me? Samuel looked at her, at this woman he loved, and knew the answer in his bones. Yes, he said simply. If it comes to that, yes. I would rather die defending what is right than live knowing I abandoned you when you needed me. We are in this together, Mila. All the way to whatever end comes. Tears filled Mila's eyes, but she was smiling through them. You are either the bravest man I have ever known or the most foolish. I have not decided which yet. Can I be both? Samuel asked, managing a small smile of his own. I think you already are, Mila said, and she kissed him there in the open yard, no longer caring who might see. Winter came to Wyoming with bitter cold and deep snow, and Samuel was grateful that he had built Mila a proper stove for her barn room. They spent the coldest days inside his house, propriety be damned, huddled together near the fire while they worked on plans for the spring breeding season. Mila taught Samuel to read Apache pictographs and some words in her language, and Samuel taught Mila to play chess with the set his father had carved from elk antlers. On Christmas Eve, Samuel gave Mila a gift he had been working on in secret for weeks. It was a saddle blanket he had woven himself from wool he had traded for in town. Dyed in patterns, Mila had told him were traditional to her people. She held it in her hands and cried. And then she gave him her own gift, a knife she had made with a handle carved from bone and decorated with intricate designs that represented thunder and the ranch. "I love you," Samuel said as they sat together by the fire, the gifts in their laps and the snow falling softly outside. "I do not care how complicated this is or how much trouble it brings. I love you, Mila Johona, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you." "I love you too," Mila said, setting aside the blanket so she could take his hands in hers. "I love you so much it frightens me sometimes. I never thought I would feel this way about anyone, especially not a white rancher in Wyoming. But you have shown me that love does not care about boundaries or rules or what other people think is proper. Love just is." "Marry me," Samuel said, the words coming out before he had consciously decided to say them. "I know we cannot do it officially, not with the way things are. But marry me in the way that matters, the way where we promise ourselves to each other before whatever powers govern the universe. Marry me and let me give you my name, so that everyone will know you belong here as much as I do." Mila stared at him, her eyes wide. "Samuel, if you give me your name, if you claim me as your wife, the consequences will be severe. People will not just disapprove. They will act. They will try to drive us out or worse." "I know," Samuel said, "but I also know that I want the whole world to know you are mine and I am yours. I want to give you my name and my protection and everything I have. I want to stand up in front of God and whoever else wants to listen and say that Mila Johona is now Mila Ashford, and anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly." "You are completely insane," Mila said, but she was smiling through her tears. "Yes, yes, I will marry you, Samuel Ashford. I will take your name and stand beside you against whatever comes. We will face it together as husband and wife." They married themselves that night, there by the fire, speaking vows they wrote in the moment and meaning every word with every fiber of their beings. Samuel promised to honor Mila and protect her and love her for all his days. Mila promised to stand with Samuel and share his burdens and build a life with him that honored both their peoples. They had no witnesses except the flames and the falling snow, but it felt more real and more sacred than any ceremony in a church could have been. When spring came and the Apache families arrived with their mares, Samuel introduced Mila as his wife, and he saw the shock and then the approval on the faces of her distant relatives. The Johona family stayed for 3 days, and Samuel learned more about Apache culture and traditions in those 3 days than he had learned in his entire life before. They shared meals and stories, and Samuel saw Mila come alive in a way she had not been before, speaking her own language and laughing at jokes he could not understand but loved to hear. The night before the Johona family was set to leave, the patriarch of the family, an old man named Taza, asked to speak with Samuel privately. They walked out into the pasture under the stars, and Taza was silent for so long that Samuel began to wonder if he had offended the old man somehow. "You gave Mila your name," Taza finally said, and it was not a question. "I did," Samuel confirmed. "She is my wife in every way that matters to me, even if your law and mine do not recognize it." "This will bring you great hardship," Taza said. "White men do not marry Apache women without paying a heavy price." "I know," Samuel said, "but she is worth any price. She saved my horse and then she saved me. I was drowning in grief and loneliness after my father died, and Mila gave me purpose again. She gave me hope. How could I not marry her?" Taza was quiet again, and then he did something Samuel did not expect. He smiled. You are a good man, Samuel Ashford. You have a good heart and you see clearly despite the fog of prejudice that clouds most men's vision. Mila was lost when she left the reservation, searching for something she could not name. I think she has found it here with you. You have my blessing, for whatever that is worth to you. It is worth a great deal, Samuel said, feeling emotion tighten his throat. Thank you, Taza. Your trust means everything to us. The Johona family left the next day, promising to return in 2 years to collect the first foals and check on the rest of the breeding program. Samuel and Mila stood together and watched them ride away, and then they turned back to the ranch and the work that waited for them. The summer was busy with all the work of running a ranch, but Samuel and Mila managed to carve out moments of joy amidst the labor. They swam in the creek that ran through Samuel's property, laughing like children as they splashed each other. They rode out to check the cattle and ended up making love under the wide Wyoming sky, hidden from view by the tall prairie grass. They talked about their future, about the children they wanted to have, and the legacy they wanted to leave. But the peace they had found could not last forever. In late July, Samuel rode into town for supplies and found a crowd gathered in front of the general store. He tied his horse and approached cautiously, and his blood ran cold when he heard what people were discussing. "Heard tell Samuel Ashford went and married that Apache squaw," one man was saying, his voice loud with outrage. "Actually married her, like she was a proper white woman instead of savage trash." "Cannot be true," another man protested. "No preacher in Wyoming would perform such a ceremony. It would be against the law and against God." "Don't need no preacher if you do it Apache style," the first man said. "Heard it from someone who was there when them Apache came to collect their mares." Ashford introduced that woman as his wife, bold as brass, like he had a right to claim such a thing. Samuel felt anger and fear war within him, but he forced himself to step into the circle of men with his head held high. "My personal life is none of your concern," he said coldly. "And I would appreciate it if you would keep my wife's name out of your mouths unless you can speak of her with respect." The crowd went silent, and Samuel could feel the hostility radiating from every person there. Carl Peterson pushed to the front, his face red with rage. "So it is true," he spat. "You actually went and married an Indian. Have you lost your mind, boy? Do you have any idea what you have done?" "I married the woman I love," Samuel said, his voice steady despite the fear churning in his gut. "The woman who saved my horse and helped build my business and makes me happier than I have ever been. Yes, I married her, and I gave her my name, and I would do it again without hesitation." "Then you are no longer welcome in this town," Carl said flatly. "We do not serve people who betray their own kind. Get your supplies somewhere else from now on, and do not come back unless you come to your senses and send that squaw packing." Samuel looked around at the faces of his neighbors, people he had known his entire life, and saw nothing but cold rejection. Even the few who looked uncomfortable did not speak up in his defense. "Fine," Samuel said, his voice hard. "I do not need anything from people who care more about the color of someone's skin than the content of their character. Mila and I will manage just fine without your approval." He turned and walked back to his horse, feeling the weight of hostile stares on his back with every step. He rode out of Laramie without looking back, and he did not stop until he reached the ranch. Mila was waiting in the yard, and one look at his face told her everything she needed to know. "They know," she said simply. "They know," Samuel confirmed. "And they have made it clear that I am no longer welcome to do business in town. We are on our own now, Mila." To his surprise, Mila did not look devastated. Instead, she looked determined. "Then we will make our own way. We have the breeding program starting to pay off." We have connections with Apache and Mexican ranchers who will trade with us. We do not need Laramie, Samuel. We only need each other and this land." Samuel dismounted and pulled Mila into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. "I am so sorry. I have made your life harder by giving you my name." "No," Mila said fiercely, pulling back to look him in the eye. "You gave me a home and a family and a purpose. You gave me love when I thought I would never feel safe enough to love anyone again. Do not apologize for that, Samuel. Not ever. We will survive this, just like we have survived everything else." And survive they did. The next year was hard, harder than anything Samuel had experienced even during the worst times after his father's death. They could not buy supplies in Laramie, so they had to ride to other towns 2 or 3 days away to get what they needed. Some of their cattle went missing, and Samuel suspected they had been stolen by neighbors who felt justified in taking from someone they saw as a traitor. The winter was brutal, and they nearly lost several horses to the cold because they could not afford enough feed, but they also had victories. The 3 mares from the Johona family all successfully foaled in the spring, producing 3 strong colts with Thunder's excellent conformation and their mother's good temperaments. Word spread among Apache and Mexican communities about Samuel's breeding program and his fair dealing, and more families began approaching him about breeding contracts. Samuel and Mila worked from dawn until well past dark most days, but they worked together, and that made all the difference. In the fall of 1884, 2 years after Mila had first saved Thunder from thieves, she told Samuel she was pregnant. He swept her into his arms and spun her around, laughing with pure joy, and Mila laughed with him despite her protests that he would make her dizzy. They spent that winter preparing for the baby, building a cradle and gathering supplies and talking endlessly about what kind of parents they wanted to be. Their son was born on a warm spring morning, delivered by a midwife from the Apache community who rode for 2 days to reach them when word came that Mila's time was near. Samuel held his newborn son in his arms and felt his heart expand with a love so fierce it almost hurt. The baby had Mila's dark eyes and black hair, and Samuel knew that his son would face challenges because of his mixed heritage. But he also knew that this child would be raised with love and strength, and the knowledge that he came from 2 proud peoples. "What should we name him?" Mila asked, exhausted but radiant as she watched Samuel cradle their baby. "I was thinking we could name him after your father," Samuel said. "You told me his name was Notch Ashford. He would carry both our legacies." Tears filled Mila's eyes. "You would do that?" "Give our son an Apache name." "Of course," Samuel said, surprised she would question it. "He is half Apache, and I want him to be proud of that half as much as he is proud of being my son. Notch Ashford, does that sound right to you?" "It sounds perfect," Mila whispered. "Come here. Let me hold our son." Samuel carefully transferred the baby to Mila's arms and climbed into bed beside her, wrapping his arms around both of them. They fell asleep like that, a family complete and whole despite everything the world had thrown at them. As Notch grew, Samuel and Mila's ranch prospered in ways that surprised even them. Thunder's reputation spread throughout the territory, and ranchers traveled from as far away as Colorado and Montana to arrange breeding contracts. Samuel was scrupulously fair in all his dealings, and his honesty earned him respect even from people who disapproved of his marriage. Slowly, very slowly, attitudes in Laramie began to soften. It helped that Samuel and Mila never caused trouble, that they paid their debts and kept their land well maintained, and raised their son to be polite and hardworking. When Notch was 3 years old, Mila told Samuel she was pregnant again. This time, Their baby was a girl with Samuel's hazel eyes and Mila's beautiful smile. They named her Sarah, after Samuel's mother who had died when he was young, and Mila added the Apache name Dolly, which meant bluebird. Sarah Dolly Ashford became the light of the ranch, growing into a spirited child who loved horses as much as her parents did. By 1890, Samuel and Mila had built something truly remarkable. Their breeding program was known throughout the West, their horses sought after for their speed and endurance and gentle temperaments. They employed 3 Apache ranch hands who lived on the property with their families, creating a small community that blended traditions from both cultures. Samuel had expanded his herd to more than 200 head of cattle, and he had purchased an additional 100 acres adjacent to his original property. But more than the material success, Samuel and Mila had created a home filled with love and laughter and the sound of children playing. They had proved that people from different worlds could build something beautiful together, that love could triumph over prejudice and fear, that courage and determination could overcome almost any obstacle. One evening in late summer, Samuel and Mila sat on the porch of their expanded house, watching Notch and Sarah play with a new litter of puppies in the yard. Notch was 8 now, tall for his age and already showing signs of becoming an excellent horseman. Sarah was 5, bright and curious and utterly fearless. Samuel reached over and took Mila's hand, lacing his fingers through hers the way he had on that first morning when they had agreed to work together. "You remember that night?" Samuel asked. "The night you saved Thunder?" "Every detail," Mila said, smiling. "I remember thinking you were brave but foolish, running out without your shirt to chase after thieves. I remember deciding in that moment that I would help you, though I had no idea why I felt so strongly about it." "I fell in love with you that morning at breakfast," Samuel admitted. "I told myself I was just grateful and curious, but I knew even then that you were going to change my life. I just did not know how completely or how wonderfully." Mila leaned her head on his shoulder. "You gave me your name forever, just like you promised. But more than that, you gave me a family and a home and a reason to stop running. You saved me, Samuel, just as much as I saved your horse." "We saved each other," Samuel said, kissing the top of her head. "And we built this beautiful life together. I would not change a single thing, Mila. Not one moment of struggle or hardship or fear. Because all of it led us here to this porch, watching our children play, knowing we have built something that will last." "What do you think will happen when they grow up?" Mila asked, gesturing to Notch and Sarah. "Will they face the same prejudice we faced? Will people judge them for being half Apache?" "Probably," Samuel said honestly. "The world does not change as fast as we would like. But we are raising them to be strong and proud and true to themselves. We are teaching them that their mixed heritage is not something to hide or be ashamed of, but something to celebrate. And we are showing them by example that love is worth fighting for, no matter what obstacles stand in the way." Mila was quiet for a moment and then she said, "I want to tell them the story, the whole story from the beginning. I want them to know exactly how we came together and what we overcame to build this family. They need to understand their history." "Then we will tell them," Samuel agreed. "Tonight, after dinner, we will gather them close and tell them the story of how their mother saved their father's horse and how that act of bravery changed everything." So that night, after a dinner of stew and fresh bread, Samuel and Mila called their children to them and began to tell the story. They told them about the 3 thieves in the darkness and about Mila riding fearlessly to intervene. They told them about the first breakfast and the agreement to work together. They told them about falling in love despite all the reasons they should not, about the neighbors who came with torches and threats, about the sheriff's warning that he could not protect them. Notch and Sarah listened with wide eyes. asking questions and gasping at the dramatic parts. When Samuel told them about asking Mila to marry him and giving her his name forever, Sarah clapped her hands with delight. "That is so romantic," she declared, and Mila laughed and hugged her daughter close. "It was romantic," Mila agreed. "But it was also terrifying and difficult, and sometimes it felt impossible. Your father and I had to be very brave to choose each other, and we had to keep being brave even when people tried to tear us apart. But we decided that our love was worth more than their approval, and we have never regretted that decision." "I am glad you chose each other," Notch said seriously, "because otherwise Sarah and I would not be here, and I really like being here." Samuel felt his throat tighten with emotion. "We are glad we chose each other too, son. And we are so incredibly glad that we have you and your sister. You two are the best parts of our whole story." As the children got ready for bed, Samuel and Mila stood together in the doorway of their home, looking out over the ranch they had built together. The moon was full and bright, just as it had been that night 8 years ago when everything had changed. But now, instead of being alone and afraid, Samuel had a family and a thriving business and a love that had proven stronger than any obstacle thrown in its path. "I love you, Mila Ashford," Samuel said, pulling his wife close. "I love you too, Samuel Ashford," Mila replied. "Forever, just like you promised." They stood there in the moonlight, two people from different worlds who had created their own world together, and they knew with absolute certainty that they had made the right choice. Love had conquered prejudice, courage had overcome fear, and two hearts that should never have met had found each other and built something beautiful that would endure long after they were gone. The years continued to unfold with their mixture of challenges and joys. Notch grew into a young man who could speak both English and Apache fluently, who understood the traditions of both his peoples and took pride in his dual heritage. He became an expert horseman, and by the time he was 16, he was helping his father run the breeding program and earning a reputation as someone who could gentle even the most difficult horses. Sarah grew into a spirited young woman who inherited her mother's fearlessness and her father's determination. She shocked the local community by insisting on learning to rope and brand cattle alongside her brother, refusing to be constrained by expectations about what young ladies should and should not do. Mila encouraged her daughter's independence, teaching her the Apache skills she would need to survive in a world that might not always be kind to a woman of mixed heritage. In 1895, when Samuel was 37 years old and Mila was 35, they welcomed their third child, another son they named Daniel Gray Ashford. The Gray was for Thunder, who was now an old horse but still the foundation of everything they had built. Daniel's arrival brought new energy to the household, and Samuel found himself marveling at how his life had turned out so differently from anything he could have imagined in those dark days after his father's death. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Samuel and Mila's fair dealing and the quality of their horses had earned them respect throughout the territory and beyond. They sold horses to ranchers, to the army, to anyone who needed strong, reliable animals. The income allowed them to improve their home, to build better barns and corrals, to hire more help. But more importantly, it allowed them to live without fear that one bad season would destroy everything they had worked for. The attitudes in Laramie also continued to evolve, though the change was glacially slow. When Wyoming achieved statehood in 1890, bringing new laws and new opportunities, Samuel dared to hope that the territory's more progressive attitudes might spread to his neighbors. Some of the merchants in town who had refused to serve him years before began cautiously accepting his business again. perhaps recognizing that his money was as good as anyone else's, or perhaps genuinely coming to respect what he and Mila had built together. One day in the spring of 1897, Sheriff Crawford, now old and close to retirement, rode out to the ranch. Samuel tensed when he saw the lawman approaching, old instincts from harder times making him wary. But the sheriff raised his hand in a peaceful greeting and dismounted slowly, his movements stiff with age. "Samuel Ashford," the sheriff said formally. "I have come to apologize." Samuel blinked in surprise. "Apologize for what?" "For not standing up for you and your wife when people were threatening you back in '83, the sheriff said bluntly. "I told myself I was just being practical, that I could not fight the whole town, that you were making your own choices and had to live with the consequences. But the truth is, I was a coward. You were right and they were wrong, and I should have said so loudly and clearly. Instead, I let prejudice and fear dictate what justice looked like, and I have regretted it ever since." Samuel felt something ease inside his chest that he had not even realized was still tight. "Thank you for saying that, Sheriff. It means more than you might think." The sheriff nodded. "You and Mila have built something good here. You have raised fine children, and you have treated everyone fairly and honestly. You have been better neighbors than most of the people who scorned you. I wanted you to know that I see that, and I am sorry I did not see it sooner." Mila had come out of the house when she saw the sheriff arrive, and now she stood beside Samuel, her hand slipping into his. "The past is the past, Sheriff," she said quietly. "What matters is the present and the future. If you are willing to treat us with the respect we deserve now, then we can move forward together." "I am willing," the sheriff said, "and I hope others will follow my example." After the sheriff left, Samuel and Mila sat together on their porch, a place they had spent countless hours over the years, and talked about how far they had come. "Do you think things will ever truly change?" Mila asked. "Or will there always be people who judge others by their blood rather than their character?" "There will always be some people like that," Samuel said honestly. "But I think things are changing slowly. Our children are growing up in a world that is different from the one we knew. Not perfect, but different. And maybe their children will grow up in a world that is different still. We are part of that change, Mila. Every day we live our lives with love and integrity, we are helping to create a better future." "I hope you are right," Mila said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I hope our grandchildren will not have to fight as hard as we did just to be together." "They will have their own fights," Samuel said. "That is the way of the world, but they will also have our example to draw strength from. They will know that their grandparents loved each other across every boundary and barrier, and that love won." In 1899, Notch fell in love with a young woman named Maria, the daughter of a Mexican rancher who had been doing business with the Ashfords for years. The rancher approved of the match, seeing in Notch the same qualities of honesty and hard work that he valued in Samuel. Notch and Maria were married in a ceremony that blended Apache, Mexican, and American traditions, and Samuel and Mila stood up with their son, their hearts full of joy and pride. Sarah, true to her independent nature, declared that she was not interested in marriage but in adventure. At 20, she announced her intention to travel, to see the world beyond Wyoming and learn everything she could. Samuel wanted to protest, wanted to keep his daughter safe at home, but Mila reminded him that Sarah had inherited her mother's restless spirit and needed to find her own path. They let Sarah go with their blessing and their prayers, trusting that they had raised her well enough to survive whatever challenges she would face. Daniel, their youngest, showed signs of having his father's business sense and his mother's gift with horses. By the time he was 10, He was already making suggestions about breeding combinations and keeping careful records of bloodlines and offspring. Samuel saw in his youngest son the future of the ranch, the person who would carry their legacy into the 20th century. As the 19th century drew to a close and the new century approached, Samuel and Mila found themselves in a place they had never imagined possible in those early uncertain days. They were respected members of their community, their business was thriving, their children were healthy and happy and making their own ways in the world. The ranch that Samuel had inherited from his father had grown into something far greater than the old man could have dreamed, not just in terms of size or profit, but in terms of what it represented. The Ashford Ranch had become a place where people of different backgrounds worked together in harmony, where Apache and Mexican and white cowboys shared bunkhouses and meals and stories. It had become a place where mixed heritage children grew up knowing they were valued and loved, where the old divisions were set aside in favor of common goals. It had become, in short, a vision of what the West could be if people chose understanding over fear, love over hatred, courage over complacency. On New Year's Eve, as 1899 became 1900, Samuel and Mila stood together on their porch and watched fireworks that someone in town was setting off to mark the turn of the century. Around them, their family and friends gathered, 3 generations now, all of them connected by bonds of love and respect that transcended the boundaries the larger world tried to impose. "We did it," Samuel said softly, his arm around Mila's waist. "We actually did it. We built this family and this business and this life despite everything." "We did," Mila agreed, leaning into his embrace. "And it was worth it, Samuel. Every hard moment, every fight, every tear. It was all worth it to get here, to this moment, surrounded by the people we love and the life we built together." "I love you, Mila Ashford," Samuel said, the words as true and powerful as they had been the first time he had spoken them 18 years before. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "I love you too, Samuel Ashford," Mila replied. "You gave me your name forever, and I have treasured that gift every single day. You are my home, my heart, my everything." They kissed there under the stars as the fireworks burst overhead and the new century began. 2 people who had defied the odds and created something beautiful. Behind them, their children and grandchildren cheered, and the sound of their joy rang out across the Wyoming prairie, a testament to the power of love and the courage of 2 people who had refused to let the world tell them who they could or could not be. As the years continued into the new century, Samuel and Mila aged together with grace and contentment. They watched Notch and Maria have children of their own, bringing more laughter and life to the ranch. They received letters from Sarah describing her adventures in San Francisco and Mexico City, and places even farther afield. They trained Daniel to take over more and more of the ranch operations, preparing him to eventually inherit the business they had built. Thunder lived to the remarkable age of 28 before passing peacefully in his sleep one warm summer night. Samuel and Mila buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, marking his grave with a stone that reads simply, "Thunder, the horse that brought us together." They stood at that grave and remembered the night he had nearly been stolen, the night that had set everything else in motion, and they were grateful for the chain of events that had begun with 3 thieves and ended with a love that had changed everything. Samuel lived to see his 70th birthday, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of them carrying forward the legacy he and Mila had created. When he died peacefully in 1926, Mila held his hand and told him one last time how much she loved him, how grateful she was for every moment they had shared. Samuel's last words were of love and gratitude, and he died with a smile on his face, knowing he had lived a life worth living. Mila lived another 5 years after Samuel's death, staying active on the ranch and teaching her grandchildren the Apache traditions she had learned from her own family so long ago. She told them stories about their grandfather, about his courage and his kindness, and his unwavering commitment to doing what was right even when it was difficult. She told them about the night she had saved his horse and how he had thanked her by giving her his name forever, by loving her with a love that had never wavered or dimmed. When Mila died in 1931 at the age of 71, she was buried beside Samuel on that same hill where thunder rested. Her gravestone read, "Mila Ashford, Apache woman, devoted wife, loving mother, bearer of the Ashford name forever." 3 generations of family came to her funeral, people of mixed heritage who existed because one Apache woman and one white rancher had been brave enough to love each other, despite a world that told them they should not. The Ashford Ranch continued for generations after Samuel and Mila were gone, always maintaining the values they had established. It remained a place where people of all backgrounds were welcome, where horses were bred with care and knowledge passed down through the family, where the story of how it all began was told and retold to every new generation. The ranch became a legend in Wyoming, not just for the quality of its horses, but for what it represented about the power of love to overcome hatred and the courage of 2 people who had refused to let the world dictate the limits of their hearts. And on clear nights, when the moon hung full and bright over the Wyoming prairie, some people swore they could see 2 figures standing together on the hill where the graves were. A man and a woman holding hands and looking out over the land they had loved and protected and built into something remarkable. Whether those sightings were real or simply the product of imagination and wishful thinking, no one could say for certain. But the love of Samuel and Mila Ashford, the Apache woman who had saved his horse and the rancher who had given her his name forever, that love was undeniably real, and it echoed through the generations, a testament to what was possible when courage met compassion, and 2 hearts chose each other against all odds. Their story lived on, passed from parent to child, from grandparent to grandchild, a reminder that love could build bridges across any divide, that kindness could overcome cruelty, and that 2 people who believed in each other could change not just their own lives, but the lives of everyone who came after them. The Ashford name, given in love and carried with pride, became a symbol of hope and possibility, proof that the divisions that seemed so insurmountable could be crossed by those with enough courage and heart. And so the story ended where it began, with a horse and a moment of bravery and a love that would last forever, echoing through time as a beacon of light in a world that sometimes seemed determined to stay in darkness. Samuel and Mila Ashford had lived and loved and built something beautiful, and that was the greatest legacy anyone could ask for, the truest happily ever after that any story could tell.